This is just such a privilege to be here with all of you. I always feel that when you're in one of the Brahma Kumaris centers that you're marinating in love and peace, and you can really feel the vibrations. I think you all, just walking in here, it's palpable because of all of the beautiful meditation that has been done here. And to be in the presence of a master yogi, I have actually been a friend of the Brahma Kumaris now for 23 years, I think. And it's taught me so much and given me so much wisdom. I still have so many questions always, but I know that Sister Jayanti has so many answers. And so I would just like for you to begin really in terms of introducing, she's been traveling all over the world, and any of you who have been to an airport lately know what a miserable time that can be. And it's just, there's a lightness of spirit and love that comes from her. And how do you do that?
Thank you, Roberta, for that very kind and warm introduction, and thank you, Marilyn. How do I do that?
How do you stay light?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's because I know that my thoughts contribute to the atmosphere. And over a long period of time, when you've been meditating, then you realize that that is a reality. Your thoughts are a reality, and the impact that your thoughts have on the body, first and foremost, but also on everything and everyone around you is a really tangible thing. And so being very aware of this and keeping your thoughts on a very positive, pure, elevated level is so important. And it's one of the subjects that requires a huge amount of attention, especially when you're surrounded by negativity. And it's like seasons. When it's winter, you expect it to be cold. When it's summer, you expect it to be warm, and that's not true anymore. Everything's gone up and down and a little bit crazy, out of sync. But that would be the normal pattern for millennia. And we've managed to change that completely. But normally you'd say that then winter is there, you have to prepare, but you also know that spring and summer are going to come. And so at this time, when it seems to be a very toxic atmosphere, an atmosphere that's really charged with a lot of negativity in so many different ways, there's a darkness there, and you wonder what's the future. But in fact, the natural way things work is that things don't stay the same forever. These are real flowers. They're not silk, they're not paper. They're real. And because they're real, they're not going to be like this tomorrow. There'll be a little bit of difference. And if we leave them sitting there for a few days, there'll be even more of a difference. And so the law of nature is that there's always, always change. And even if there seems to be darkness today, I know for sure it's not just a hope, but it's a conviction that after the night, after the darkest hour, the day surely has to come, and the dawn will break after the darkest hour. And so I know that beyond what I'm seeing today in the darkness and negativity, there's something better that's ahead. There's going to be a day in which there's light and love and joy. And I also know that in a way it's natural that that should happen, but I also know that I can make a very positive contribution towards that in terms of my awareness, my consciousness, my thoughts, my feelings, the words I use, the actions I perform. We have a choice in all of these things. And so spiritual insight into bringing light into the world means taking responsibility. I don't say, well, it's going to happen just like that, but we've all contributed in some way or another to the conditions today, and our transformation and our change is going to change the world also. it seems a very bombastic thing to say. When I change, the world will change. But it happens like that. When I change, my little world around me changes. And if any of you have thought about transformation and worked on transformation on an inner level, you would have seen that happen. So many different things that indicate that this is so true. But just think about it. Any individual who's witnessed something good happening and feels that they're inspired to do something good themselves, the transformation of one reaches out to at least 125. And ask me later how I know that figure.
How do you know that? I can't resist.
From Harvard. It was experiments done in Harvard that I heard about. So, long story, but and that's the summary. So yes, I know that I need to have that attention on myself. And if I keep my thoughts light and easy and flexible, then things are going to be that much easier. And even if things are not so easy, the fact that you stay light makes things much easier. This morning we were studying a lesson together, and one of the things that sticks in my mind is how when there's real gold, it's malleable. You can actually shape it with your own fingers. You don't need any tools. And when it's got alloy mixed in it, then it's hard and you can't shift it. And so as you go through a process of cleansing what's going on inside and removing the negativity that's so deeply rooted within, as you realize that and you work on that and you start removing that, then you adapt to situations without losing yourself in the situation. You're able to see what to do, how to do it, and where it is you want to go. So that's a sort of summary of tonight's program.
And, you know, the vibrations that you're talking about putting out, which is something that we all feel also. I mean, if you're in an elevator with a person who's upset or angry, you can feel the tension and the vibrations. And if you're with somebody with pure heart and who's generous, you can feel that, and it's inspiring. And yet, as somebody who's too much of a news junkie, you know, we're bombarded with this other energy that is coming at us from the tube or from our phones or from people. You know, we have wars, we have a climate crisis, we have democracy falling apart, unraveling. And those are the stories that we're hearing on a daily basis if we are trying to pay attention to the news. And I need to be on a news diet, I know that. So how do you tune out of those dark vibrations that are coming, you know, and yet if you want to be informed, how do you balance that with the purity of your vibrations and using vibrations as a kind of transmission to create a better world?
I think firstly, I need to want to make that happen. Sometimes we're caught up in negativities to such an extent that we don't even realize it, and we don't even know that there can be an alternative way of awareness and living. And when it comes to the point where I say, well, I know all this is happening, but I want to be able to stay above it. And if I have that awareness, if I've come to that understanding that I don't want to stay down here, I want to be up above, then you start looking for tools. And if you begin the day with the right awareness, it's like setting your compass again and beginning the day with time for yourself, time to have an inner dialogue, so that I get to know myself more and more deeply. And it sounds strange, but we go through life 20 years old, 40 years old, 60 years old, and stop. How well do I actually know myself? Do I still surprise myself with my reactions to people or events and situations? Or am I able to manage to sail through those things, being true to myself and my own inner core values? I think for many of us, unless we begin that journey of going within, we don't really know ourselves. Okay, here's a question. When was the last time you had a real heart-to-heart conversation with yourself? You don't have to answer. It was just a checkpoint for you. And we don't do that so often. And so if I can do that for myself, begin the day with the dialogue so that I again connect with my own inner values. And all of us have those, but we're not always aware of them. And the negativity outside is great for suppressing whatever there is within. And so I need to have that dialogue to become aware, to be able to emerge them within myself in a very clear, conscious way, so that then I can start using them and express them through my words and my actions. And if I can do that in the morning, one is the time for the dialogue within. The second is to be able to give my mind something nourishing. You used an interesting expression, news diet. So
Also news, I said I was a news junkie, and I realized that I'm absorbing junk.
so that's a big realization.
Oh, words are important. I realize, that.
And most people, again, don't realize that that's what they're doing. They're absorbing a lot of junk food all the time. They're feeding their mind that. And if in a very conscious way, I were to read something that's uplifting, or hear something that I know is going to be healthy for me, good things that can be a source of nourishment for me through the day. We study together here in this room every morning, and in that study we hear very beautiful, uplifting thoughts. And out of, say, maybe half an hour of a reading, it's about that, half an hour to 40 minutes, if I were to take 3 points that I want to reflect on through the day, then I'm feeding my mind something very nourishing and powerful. And so, yes, by all means, have a news diet, but also the other thing, find nourishing things that can support you and give you inspiration and enthusiasm and health. And that way, you're keeping yourself very safe from the impact and the influence of the vibrations around me. And as a first step, let me keep myself protected and safe. And then secondly, as you follow through that awareness and you're sending out those vibrations in a very conscious way, you're beginning to move in that direction of creating a better world.
You know, one of the things that I learned from the Brahma Kumaris that helped me so much is being told that it's a practice. And so I realized that, I have good days when I meditate and days where my monkey brain is very dominant. And I remind myself that it's a practice, and I'm a student. And one of the things as a student is about what's going on with the climate crisis that we're in, which everybody now recognizes what the scientists have been saying for years. We all know that we're in it. Can you share your thoughts about climate in a spiritual context?
Again, it sounds very far-fetched, but they say that when you lift your finger, you move the stars. There's a domino effect of action and even words and vibrations on everything around us. And what's been happening is not just our thoughts which have become negative, but also our actions in which we've really created an imbalance within the Earth's situation. I think it was in the year 2000, I was at a conference at the UN. It was actually the Millennium Peace Summit, the first time that spiritual and religious leaders had come together at the UN. The UN is a political body. They don't need to call religious and spiritual leaders, but they did. And it was for good reason. Not a long story, but they did that. And in one of the ceremonies, we had people, the ethnic people from Alaska come, and there's various ethnic groups there apparently, but one particular group had come, and they said, "We've come to tell you all that the ice is melting." Now, it was a shocking statement to hear in 2000, but by now you're used to hearing about the glaciers melting. But at that time when they said, "The ice is melting, you people don't know that this is going on, but the ice is melting." And it created such an image in my mind that it touched very deeply. And why is the ice melting? It doesn't happen just like that. It's been there for millennia. So what is it that's suddenly changed? And it's human intervention. It's human actions. It's the things that we have been doing. And I'm not blaming progress or technology or anything, because you can use anything in either direction, negative or positive. But certainly the impact we've had on the species on the planet, population has doubled and the species have been halved. The impact we've had on climate is because of our actions based on consumerism and materialism, and we've been chasing happiness outside, thinking that we can buy happiness, we can go away and be happy, we can do this and be happy, and it's okay for a very temporary period, but that's it, it's a temporary fix. And then we come back from wherever it is, or the excitement dies down from buying something new, and you're back to where you were before, except you're out of pocket a little bit, and you've hurt the planet a little bit. Now multiply that by the number of billions of the population, and you begin to see how we've been actually not just influencing the environment, but we've been aggressing the environment. We've been violent against the environment. And so, yes, the heat that's been generated has caused the melting of the glaciers, and it's visible now, you can see it. It's coming because there isn't that inner capacity. Think back to some years ago when children were quite happy to play with paper and paints and occupy themselves, and no child would say, "I'm bored." They'd find something to do and be quite happy and content. And today, you give expensive toys, and after a couple of days, the child will say, "I'm bored." So we've become so dependent on all the things outside, but we've forgotten that we have huge treasure store of resources within, but we don't take the time to go on that inner journey. And so the result is climate change, consumerism, materialism, lack of inner capacity. And so again, it's actually an opportunity. When you hit a wall, then you say, "Well, where do I go now?" And you can't go further here, there's a wall there. And so what you can do is go inside. And when you go inside and you discover that there is peace, there is love, there is joy within you, then you can simplify your life to an incredible extent. You don't need to be buying. So
I've been reflecting a lot. I tend to think in terms of problems from my old investigative reporting times. And I've been thinking about, food, what we eat, how we grow it, the transportation, the waste. It's a third of the problem with the climate crisis. And then it was sort of like a light bulb of, oh, it's a third of the solution then, which is something that we can all do.
If we choose to.
Yes, right. And so how do you get that message out? I mean, it's asking people to make some sacrifices in their lives, to reject consumerism. It doesn't have to be a sad experience at all, but something as simple as that. I think about, okay, so what can I do on a daily basis? And that's something that's very, should be somewhat simple. Change, like eating meat, eating beef, I mean, that's a big contributor to the climate crisis. Never mind the how we treat animals.
Some years ago, at one of the climate change conferences, this man called Johan Rockstrom, and at that time he was in Stockholm at the Institute of Climate Change there. Now he's in Potsdam in Germany, near Berlin, and he's heading up the Institute of Climate Change there. And that's maybe one of the most prestigious institutes for climate change at the moment. And he was supporting a workshop in one of these conferences, a side event. And the people who he had asked to speak there were from Chatterhouse, the think tank that exists in London. When they say Chatterhouse rules, they mean whatever's talked about inside, you don't repeat outside. So that's the Institute, a think tank. And they had been working on research that they shared at that particular event. They'd been working on this for about 4 years. And they were presenting this in that particular context of climate change conference for the first time. And what they said was that definitely meat diet consumes 8 times more water than plant-based diet. It requires 8 times more the amount of land. And of course, you can also see the impact on health in a negative way.
Right.
And all this is now very clear through all the research that's happened. It's not somebody sitting in a corner looking in a crystal ball and saying all these things. It's hardcore scientific research. And they said, we were also curious as to why nobody talks about this in climate change conferences, because more than the whole subject of transport, and we hear about electrical cars, we hear about reducing your flights, all that is true, but they said that more than the impact of transport is the impact of agriculture and dairy farming, both of these things. And they said that it's because of habit. We developed habits that we don't want to change. Secondly, it's because of religious influence, that we associate different periods within the religious calendar with different foods. Festivals are connected with foods, and then you have your period of fasting, then you have your period of feasting, but all of that is revolving around food, and to change that would be like taboo. And the third, culture. Within our culture today, eating together, but eating certain types of food is considered to be the norm. And so we said, trying to deal with habit and religion and culture all at the same time is so difficult. And so this is why people don't want to go there. They don't want to touch it. At one point, Paul McCartney, I think you've heard the name mostly.
That Beatle boy.
Correct. So he wanted to introduce something that he coined the phrase meatless Monday, 1 day a week when everybody would agree to be meatless. Where did it go? Nowhere at all. most things that one of the former Beatles says hits the headlines and everybody wants to do it. But Paul McCartney saying, "Let Monday be Meatless Monday," nobody was interested. So to really deeply accept that these things are real. It's not imagination. It's nobody's personal agenda. But these are the facts of reality. But because they're uncomfortable, Al Gore uses the term inconvenient truth. When it's inconvenient, we'd rather ignore it and just leave me alone. I'll get on with my life as I want to, without realizing the long-term impact. The original Indians of America would say, think about, if I do something, what impact is it going to have 7 generations down the line? Now that is far thinking.
Yeah.
And today I don't even want to know what's going to happen in the next 20 years. Never mind 7 generations. But the impact of all of this, it feels as if it's too much to think about. So I bury my head in the sand and say, oh, let me stay here.
I love that 7 generations. If people would just think of our children, our grandchildren, because the climate crisis is not down the road. It is, we're in it now, and so and I am really hopeful seeing how activated young people are, because they want a livable future. I wondered about when you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, which I love dearly, although I have a little, when you mentioned how important words are, and sustainable is not the right word, I think, because if I said, like, how is your marriage going, and you said it's sustainable, I would be worried. I'd be concerned as your friend. That's why flourishing was, why, so we have 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Why isn't spirituality in there somewhere? Because that's human sustenance. That's what we're all here for.
Spirituality is actually at the heart of all of them. Whether you think about eliminating poverty, and so that awareness that all of us are one family, which every tradition talks about. No one says that you are different to the other. They'll all say you are one human family. And so if you think about just that one aspect of spirituality, then our vision of the other changes, and I begin to see everyone as my family. We are siblings, one family. And so go through each one of the development goals and accept the sort of industrial development, but even if we think about that as being for service of humanity, our attitude to that would be different very much. But all the others are very, very deeply spiritual, and the connecting thread of all of them is respecting the self and respecting others and respecting nature. If you were to just take up this one word of respect, being able to have self-esteem and respect for the self, then when I see you, there's not just respect as a mental thing, but it's respect as a relationship, and it's what is it that I can do for the other. So I believe that it's not been spelt out, but yet every one of those development goals is based on spirituality. And if we bring spirituality and the values that spirituality connects us with, 5 values: peace, love, truth, joy, and purity. These are the intrinsic qualities of every human being, but not in the physiology, but within the spirit, the soul. And so connecting spirituality means connecting with these values, which we see are totally missing in the world today, because we haven't connected with ourselves. And so come back to that awareness of the world within, and you start accessing these qualities and you start using them, and there you go. You don't need to do anything else. You create a better world.
I could make a list of things that I love about the Brahma Kumaris. One of them is that it is in the Constitution to be led by women. How cool is that? And I only recently learned that the president of India is a Brahma Kumari. Can you say a few words about, the president leading and being a spiritual person?
Before she became president, she was governor of one of the states, and she would come to Mount Abu, our headquarters in India, frequently. And so I would hear her speak in conferences. And what would touch me was her simplicity and no pretense, very simple, very humble. She's from a tribal background. So she's not just a Brahma Kumari, she's from a tribal background. And she comes from a very, very poor family. And they didn't have the resources, and they didn't think it was necessary to have a girl educated beyond 10 years of age. And at that age, there was a visiting politician in her tribal area, and she was there with her family. And this 10-year-old girl had the courage to come up on stage and say, "I have a question for you." And she said, "Why is it that girls aren't given support to have further education?" And he was so deeply moved that he organized a scholarship for her for further education. And she just went ahead. Very important, you have the courage of your convictions, in which you say, this is a real need. And you're not scared. You're able to present that. And then what you're wanting is knowledge, education. And you strive and you work hard at it. And she then came to be the governor of her state. And along the journey, she lost her son, she lost her husband, she lost her mother. All these things happened, but she just kept moving on. And at the darkest point, and this was when her son had just died, when that happened, she was devastated. And that's when she realized that she had to find something to hold on to. And she came in contact with the Brahma Kumaris. That would have been, I don't know how many years ago, but a long time ago. And she started practicing. And then when the other tragedies hit her, she had the courage to be able to sustain others around her. And all of this has meant that her commitment and her faith to spirituality is very strong, but she's also maintained the awareness of her background, and she keeps her simplicity and her humility. These three things.
Are there ways that you see that in her leadership also, that spirituality coming into how she leads in India?
There are two things very interesting at this moment that I'm seeing. Her needs for herself are totally simple. And to have a leader who has simplicity is interesting. She's not been impacted by the trappings of power in that way. She's maintained it. Her diet, when she entered the governor's house, she made sure that the diet changed to plant-based diet. Same thing when she came to the presidential house, she made sure that it's plant-based again. And so she's kept to her principles. And when you see a leader who's willing to be very open, transparent about their principles and their lifestyle, and you see that they're not taking what is being offered to them even, never mind grabbing, they don't even take what is supposed to be their right, you begin to explore more deeply, and you begin to see other facets of this personality and appreciate that. So I think she's winning the trust of people. Transparency means that if you can be transparent, people begin to trust you. And so I think that's what's happened. So
I love the story of her simplicity and walking the talk. What are your thoughts about the growing chasm between the wealthy and poverty in the world, certainly in America, and throughout the world?
throughout the world, Bombay, every big city, rural areas, poverty is different in the sense that you can still be self-sufficient. At least this is what I've seen in the rural areas in India. But in the big cities where people think they're going to find gold in the pavement, it doesn't quite work out like that, and you see the stark reality of the misery of poverty. I see that it's not a question of lack of resources in the world. I see that if again there could be a spiritual approach, there's enough to be shared with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone could be fed. Many years ago, Mahatma Gandhi said, there's enough for everyone, but there isn't enough for anyone's greed. There's enough for everyone's need, but not enough for even one person's greed.
And yet the chasm continues to grow. And I think about billionaires with, many, many houses and not enough days in their lives to spend all of the money that they're accumulating. And some are very generous, but when you look around the world at these problems that are solvable, a child should not go to bed hungry, ever, or die of a disease that can be prevented. And so how do you reconcile that, I would think, I wish that, that there was a sense of urgency and generosity in, even though there is, I guess, the giving pledge, where many have said that, pledged that they would give away half of their money during their lifetime, but it's as if they're waiting for a cancer diagnosis to do it. I mean, we need the courage right now to, the courage of serious generosity.
Many, many years ago, when I was with the founder, Brahma Baba, I had the opportunity of meeting him through my childhood years and teenage years, because my mother and grandmother were connected with the Brahma Kumaris. And then when I was 18, I decided that this is what I want to do. And it was at that time, and I was by then 19 and he was 92. And that was his last year in the physical world. And I'm very grateful that I had that understanding for transformation at that time. And so there was a very interesting little scenario. And he and I were alone. And he asked me the question, is it possible to remove the poverty of the world? And I didn't have an answer. And this is 1968. And by then I'd come to India several times, and I'd seen poverty in India. England, you see poverty now. In those days you didn't, but now you do. And so I didn't have an answer. And he said, yes, it's possible. Is it possible to remove the suffering of people in the world? And I waited, and he again said, yes, it's possible. And then he said, is it possible to remove disease from the world? And he again said, yes, it's possible. Then he said, but it'll only be possible if we remove lust, anger, greed, attachment and ego. Then we can remove all these situations of the world. All of that can change. And then he said, but you can't tell others to do this. You have to do it yourself. And then if others see it and are inspired, they will do the same. And then in the 2000, that was 1968, but it made a lot of sense. And in the year 2000, at the same Millennium Peace Summit, they had a lineup, and it was the first time that religious and spiritual leaders were called to the UN. The lineup that they had the next day was of Assistant Secretary Generals and Under Secretary Generals. And these were the people who headed up all the different branches. So UNESCO was there, UNICEF was there, Save the Children, ILO, the International Labour Organization, Environment, Population, all of them, WHO. And they all said the same thing. The UN was by then about 50 years old. And they said, we have more money, we have more human resources, we have more technology, we have more information, we have more of everything. But the situation is worse than it was 50 years ago. The only one that said something good was WHO, and they said we've been able to eradicate polio and smallpox, but on the other side, we are seeing TB coming back, and also mental health issues are going to be the next pandemic. So that was 2000 that they said all this. But everybody else anyway said things are worse. And so then they said that why we've called the religious and spiritual leaders together is because this is the reality. We have everything, but we're not able to make a difference. And that's because governments aren't motivated, but people also don't have the will to make these changes. And we know that it's religious and spiritual leaders who are in touch with the grassroots in a big way. And our hope is that you will be able to motivate people to do something. So yes, there can be a difference, but there can be only the difference when there is this change of heart and change of consciousness.
We're going to have a meditation with you, but I have one last question. And that is, there are so many people who really do care about the world. People are generally good and caring, but they feel overwhelmed and despairing, and just feel there's nothing that I can do. How do you guide people who feel apathetic to reach inside and to, to have that inner peace and love, and to be able to put that out in the world instead of just feeling a sense of overwhelming anxiety and despair and mental health issues that are epidemic?
Many years ago, we did a project that was called Global Cooperation for a Better World. And within that, we asked people 3 questions. How do you see a better world? How do you see relationships in that better world? How do you see yourself in that better world? And the answer that came back from everywhere, and it reached 128 countries. And at that time, the map of the world was different. And 128 countries at that time meant every country with a population of over 1 million. So we've been able to reach out with people being inspired and interested in carrying it to other countries. We only had centers in about 68 countries at that time, but it just snowballed. It was beyond our expectations. And so what came out was that we want a world of values. But the contributions that people sent in terms of their ideas and how they processed these 3 questions in small groups was beautiful. And one person sent in this particular story. And after that, I've seen that it's a story that comes up in different cultures with a few additions and embellishments along the way. But the story is all the animals were gathered on one side of the river, and they were looking at this fire that was raging on the other side of the river. And they looked at each other and said, well, what can we do? And so all the big animals just stood there watching. The little animals didn't know what to do either. And a little bird came, and the bird saw what was going on, dipped down to the water, and picked up a few drops and carried it to the other side. And the big animals said, but what difference are these few drops going to make? And the bird said, I will do what I need to do, and carried on. And just at that moment, an angel happened to fly past and saw what was happening and saw the courage of this little bird and sent along a rain cloud. And the rain cloud put out the fire. Now, what this story tells me is that if I do what I need to do, who knows what energies it'll attract and what energies it'll motivate and set off that can support that pure, positive, powerful thought. And so I would say, don't underestimate the value of what one can do. And in India, they always have a very lovely idea, because the form of the soul is just a point of light, a little zero. And the form of the source from whom we draw strength also is just a point of light. And this is the image you see here behind me. And so I on my own is one, but when I connect with the divine, the zero, it multiplies. I connect further and further and further, and the zeros multiply, and there's a huge amount of energy that becomes available to make a difference.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful parable also. I'll hold that close to my heart. I'm going to leave the stage. We're going to have... Oh, sorry. Yes. Questions from the audience. Let me check the time. Yes, good. You have a lovely opportunity to ask your own questions of Sister Jayanti. And we have a microphone.
If you raise your hand, we can pass you the mic.
Yeah.
So I heard the word toxicity, and I want to understand how do you define that in spiritual language, because spirituality always talks about changing ourselves than trying to change the world. So how do you define toxicity and how do you deal with it?
In its original natural state, the human soul is pure. And in that purity, there is also peace and love and joy and truth. And when I forget myself and come into the influence of just the external world, then these qualities get suppressed. And what comes up instead is things like attachment instead of love, things like anger instead of peace, things like greed instead of contentment. And so these are the toxic elements that have impacted us, and these seem to be reaching a very critical peak at the moment. The problems that you mentioned earlier, the injustice and the inequality that exists in the world, is the anger, the greed, the ego. And so all these are the toxins that have impacted the soul, and they're creating a disturbance within my own mind, in my own mental state of health and well-being, but they're also impacting the physiology of the body. And so where our immune system has become so weak, there have always been viruses. They're not a new invention, they've always existed. and we've coexisted with them. But now, because our immunity is so diminished, because of not just the toxins in the water and the air and the food that we eat, all of that, but also through what's going on in our mind. This is why even bodies are now reacting to that. So, and the way to remove these, it's not a battle, but it's a transformation. If I decide to remain peaceful and I make my commitment to non-violence and peace, then every day when I begin my day, I'm emerging the peace. And it's not a difficult journey, it's not a hardship or penance that I have to endure, but it's something very beautiful. And I'm discovering that there is peace within myself. And of course, if I choose to connect with the source of love and peace, I'm able to draw that further into myself.
There's one way in the back there.
As somebody who's likely been able to travel the world, are there any other traditions, religions, and cultures that you've been able to draw inspiration from?
Sorry, I didn't understand. Say that again.
As somebody who's been able to travel the world, are there any other cultures, religions, traditions that you've been able to draw inspiration from?
Most of them, in the sense that there's a particular speciality that every tradition offers. For example, Judaism, the focus on one God, very beautiful. Christianity, the focus on love for God. The indigenous cultures where nature is of paramount importance, and to be able to live a life that's compatible with the natural energies of the earth and nature itself, that's something again very beautiful. Part of the journey of spirituality is to be able to learn at every step and learn from others, so that you're constantly in this journey of learning. We use this term lifelong learning nowadays, but I've lived with people, women in particular. I'm thinking of Dadi Janki, who visited Boston several times in the past. She lived to 104 and passed away just March 2020, so very recently. And until the last month, when she did fly away, she would always study. She would read. She would be learning continually. And my fortune was that I stayed with her for 40 years. And so it's something that I'm very aware of. If you study and learn from others, people, cultures, traditions, it'll keep the grey cells active and engaged, and it'll keep the mind bright and active.
Dadi Janki taught me about detachment. And my husband made a sign by my desk where I'm on my computer all day that says detachment, love, Dadi Janki, as a reminder. Very sweet. It's been up there for 9 years.
How many of you met Dadi Janki? I'm curious.
Yeah, lovely.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that. I'm interested to know about, so values, imbibing those values, reminding yourself with them every day in the morning and making the commitment to carry it through the day, very important. But then how do you translate these values practically into reality? And I'm specifically talking about the map I saw outside of the Brahma Kumaris centers. This is very important. Spreading these values, It's one thing to do it on an individual basis, which is the start of everything. It's very important. But then spreading this out to the world, there are practical considerations. There has to be a plan. And this I'm very interested in as someone who is building a movement also of women with other women across the world. And this is something we are continuously confronted with. How to spread this?
Well,
these
here we
values.
are.
And I'm speaking with the experts who managed to have a map like this outside. So I want to know your secret, please.
Well, first I have to say, it wasn't a master plan in anyone's mind. It was something that had to happen because there was a need. When you fulfill a need, then things move automatically. When Daddy came to London in 1974, we were in a tiny little place in an area of London that's not so beautiful. And from that little house, and the people who started coming there, London was already cosmopolitan. There was somebody from Australia, there was somebody from Germany, there was somebody from America. They just came, and they just came for themselves, and they took training. And within a short space of time, we needed to buy the house next door, and it happened. And within another short space, and it just carried on. But the group of people that came, and the group expanded, they were finding benefit from what they were doing. And they were then inspired to go back to their own countries and share these ideas. And they didn't know what was going to happen. They just were sharing this with family and friends and contacts. And a little center started. And from little centers, there's now big retreat centers. And so when there's an idea whose time has come, then time moves things in that direction. And you just have to make sure you stay committed with what you know is true. And if you do that, then even one committed person can inspire everyone around them. That's the secret.
Roberta and Sister Jayanti, I'm over here. First of all, thank you. This conversation has been so rich. As an educator, and I'm also a news junkie. I call myself a news aficionado, not a news junkie, a news aficionado, because I think you have to be informed in order to know what to advocate about. And so I use the power of detached observer that I've learned from the big case, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But how do you really encourage movements like the women's movement, things that need to change in our society, in our world? We're living in a very divisive world. I can try to be the change I want to be, but when you're hearing such anger and depression post-pandemic, what can I do to try to help heal those people? I'm trying, but I don't feel like I'm succeeding.
What I need to do is to re-energize myself every single day, because otherwise there's going to be compassion fatigue, there's going to be volunteer fatigue, all these things set in. And so I just need to recharge myself. Even in a simple way, you need to recharge your little phone every night. Otherwise, next day, it's not going to work for you. So I need a recharge. And that means meditation every day. I need to practice every day. And if I can do that, then I'll have the energy to keep going. And I'll also have the energy to inspire and sustain others who are interested. And as I said, when you're on track, then time supports you and helps you. And the drama of the world moves in that direction also. We've been working with women's empowerment, just say, for example, in India for 80 years now. It's over 80 years when Brahma Baba started. And guess what? Now Modi has started, or plans to start, a women's empowerment movement on a national level. Now, the Prime Minister, who's a man, saying that this is what he wants to do is good news. We've also heard that next year's now, I'm not advocating anything for the military, but it's interesting information. You know, many countries, when they have their Independence Day parades, Republic Day parades, they have a big show of the military. And so far, it's always been men, men, men. And next year, January 2024, apparently there's a circular being sent to all the officers within the administration and the military that it has to be a women's parade. So as I say, it's got its downside, but the upside is that the role of women is being acknowledged in a big way. And so it's no more a little group of feminists who are struggling and fighting, but there's a recognition that there is a need for this and that there has to be this next step in which there is that equality. So things begin to move. We just have to keep going and not get stuck anywhere.
It's more than faith. It's a knowingness that having that inner peace and consciousness and connection is going to change the world. Yeah,
But also it's a season. You know, in wintertime, I remember arriving in England December 1957, which was a very bad year for winter. It was a huge amount of snow in England. Somebody remembers it. So we landed in England at that time, and I saw trees without leaves for the first time. I'd never seen that. And I thought, how awful. These poor trees have lost all their leaves. What happened? And I didn't ask anyone, and nobody told me. But in spring, I was so happy that these poor forlorn trees now had little buds, and I was seeing beauty. I was seeing leaves come out. And it was amazing. I just remember that incredible joy I felt when I saw this transformation. So a child doesn't know that in winter this is normal, it happens, and then spring comes and something beautiful happens. So when we see the darkness, we think, what can I do? What's going to happen? But there's light ahead. There is going to be a change, and it's going to definitely happen. It's not a hope, it's a reality.
Lovely.
We have one last question, and then we'll have to stop.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, I feel at peace just like listening to your voice, and like I don't know, that kind of like a personal problem. Like I feel like I just give off like this bad vibe or something like that. I've been attracting like a lot of like negative energy. I try to be peaceful. Like I'm raised Hindu. I don't eat meat. I never had meat, but like I don't know. I'm just trying to like attract, you know, like some good energy, I guess. But like I've been having like really like I don't even like it's like scary. Like I've been having like demonic like type of like situations in my life, like weird occurrences, and I don't know how to like deal with it. And like I'm just trying to like you know, be a normal person in society. And yeah, like I don't really know, like I don't know like how, like, even just like my neighbors, like just the way people look at me, and I've been like this for a long time. Like I don't even know what I'm doing wrong.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you
That's
for the
very
courage.
courageous. Yeah.
I appreciate that you've put up your hand a few times and been persistent, and the mic finally came to you, so thank you. I recommend that you connect with Brother Dave after this event and fix a time to come and see him, just for one lesson. And that one lesson, which is so important, and it helped me with many, many questions that I had, just that one first lesson. And that was to be able to know the self. Who am I? And I think that will definitely help you. Then you can see what you want to do after that. But this isn't an advertisement, but it's information. And I'm not sure whether Marilyn was going to give you that information. Well, I leave it to her. but there's a very powerful introductory course that we offer, and you've heard, I think somebody said it,
Yeah.
that all our activities are offered free as a service to the community. So there's no price tag attached.
There's help right here. And with that, that's a wonderful transition, I think, to do the practice, to meditate together and feel the vibrations. And we're going to have a guided meditation by Sister Jayanti. Thank you so much. Om Shanti.
Thank you for picking up everybody's thoughts and feelings and expressing them in your questions. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to meditate with you now.
So thanks. Thanks so much to both Roberta and of course Jayanti Didi for sharing such beautiful inspirations and insights with us. And I hope everyone is feeling that hope and upliftment, that spring is coming, light is coming, the darkness is not forever. Really beautiful. So let's experience that together with Jayanti Didi. She'll lead us through a guided commentary, just listening to her words, following along, creating that in your intellect, in your mind, and experiencing the peace, the love, the joy that she's talking about. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Come to the awareness of the inner being, the being that I am, the light that's shining in the center of the forehead. This is who I am. I have this amazing physical body, this instrument, this chariot, but I am the being within, the driver of this chariot. And I focus on this being, and I can feel the energy in my forehead. I am a being of light. I am a being of peace. And as I go deeper and deeper inside myself, going deeper and deeper within, I come to that sacred space within where only I can enter. And in this space, there is not only peace, but there is also love. There is also truth and joy and purity. These are the qualities I feel comfortable with, because in my own original state, these are the intrinsic qualities that I carry. This is who I am. And having been on this human journey, I carry many weaknesses, many flaws, but I know that I have to come back to my original pure state of being. I stay connected with the soul, the shining star that I am, and I can feel the presence of love that is greater than my own, of peace more powerful than myself. And I connect with the source of all goodness, all values, all spiritual powers. And as I connect with the source, I have access to unlimited treasures. I can take as much love as I choose. I can take purity and joy. And I can take the power of truth. As energy flows and recharges I, the soul, I begin my journey of transformation. And I know that these vibrations not only reach me, but they reach out into the world. And where there are souls seeking, these vibrations touch them and they absorb the same love and peace. These vibrations from the source reach out to all forms of life so that they feel safe and protected. These vibrations touch every aspect of matter and each corner of the planet, so that nature also again begins to cooperate. And the light and love transform the planet and all within it, so that a state of harmony, support and cooperation returns. I hold this awareness And I resolve to keep this consciousness of who I am and what I must do. And I bring back this awareness to guide me in my life now. Om Shanti. Thank you.